Hi everybody, my name is Frances Koncan. I am an Anishinaabe and Slovene writer, sometimes journalist, sometimes director, and I'm sitting here with Pablo. How do you say your last name, Pablo?
Pablo Felices-Luna.
We're gonna chat.
Yeah, we are, and in the spirit of chatting, hey Frances,
Yeah.
how do you feel about land acknowledgements? Why don't we start right there?
Well, Pablo, I myself do not like doing land acknowledgements. I feel like it's really weird to acknowledge land that I'm from. I guess it's kind of like inviting people to a party that you're hosting, but I feel like I didn't design the party,
Yeah.
I'm not in charge of the party, this is not my idea party, is kind of how I feel about land acknowledgements. I do like them when they're done well by people who have kind of written them themselves and really done research, but yeah, it's hard to find a way to do it that doesn't feel like I'm satirizing my existence. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And the reason we wanted to talk about this is because we do land acknowledgements here at MTYP on opening nights and on a regular basis. For me, as somebody who's a guest, who has come both into this country and into Manitoba by choice as an immigrant, I think it is important that I acknowledge where I am, that I say thank you, that every time that we gather, I usually say, I acknowledge and we thank the Anishinaabe that we're here on Treaty 1 territory, that this is the homeland of the Métis Nation, that we are grateful to all the custodians of the land. I think it's important because my family lives here, because I practice my art as a theater maker here. But I remember going through a training session where we talked a lot about the importance of action and how it's connected. So it's sort of become a thing as well with my family, and this is something that I discuss with my family, that if I'm going to make any kind of an acknowledgement, on a day like today where we're gathered here at the Forks, that my family makes a contribution to the Manitoba Indigenous Cultural Education Center, because they're doing great work, and the work that they do help us as well. So that's where we are, and I think we will say that that's sort of our acknowledgement of where we begin.
Great. What do you want next, Pablo? Do you want these questions?
Sure, I don't know. Why don't we dive in and we'll see where it goes.
Perfect,
Yeah?
Okay. So, I guess it was a couple weeks ago now, I, just in an aggressive huff, typed up some questions on my phone, and I actually had no intention of reading them when I read them at this town hall we had for theater, but I did, and Pablo invited me to come read them directly to his face.
Yeah. Well, okay, so why don't we begin then? I would say I found them really provocative. What I said to you when I said let's have this conversation is that they really sort of inspired a lot of thinking, a lot of reflection, and that's always a good opportunity. So why not tackle them? So please do ask me the questions, and I'll do my best to answer them.
Okay. All right. So the first question I had on my iPhone notes was, what makes you confident that your leadership is anti-racist? How do you embody anti-racist practices as an individual and as an institution? And how are you demonstrating that to the theater community?
Okay. So let's start with the leadership piece. The leadership of this organization, as it is structured, is Deborah, our general manager, and I'm the artistic director. So let me start with Deborah. Deborah and I talk a lot, and we have some really good conversations all the time. But especially when we're talking about these questions around anti-racism, Deborah always says, as a white prairie person, I have a lot of learning to do, which I think is true of all of us. I think what she tends to leave out is all the learning that she's done. And one of the reasons I love working with Deborah is that she brings the perspective of somebody who's actually done a lot of work with multicultural and different ethnic groups. And she brings that perspective on things that I miss, that other people on the team miss. So I know that that's something that I value about our working relationship, for sure. In my case, what I will say is when the board hired me 6 years ago, believe it or not, I know that the first thing that they saw is they saw somebody who loves working for young audiences. If there's a defining thing in my career, that's what I've done. I've worked for young audiences and for children and young people my entire career. I'm also the parent of 3 amazing young women, one of whom loves music, and so much so that when she starts giggling or laughing, she lights up the room, and who has a profound intellectual disability. So I'd like to think that I bring that perspective into my work. But we can't sort of mince around the fact that they're also bringing a Latinx artist to be the artistic leader of this organization. So that's part of who I am, that's part of my practice. But I'm also keenly aware of the fact that this term that we're using a lot these days of BIPOC is not a monolith. So it's not like all of a sudden I can say, well, based on my experience as a Latino in Canada, I can speak for the Indigenous perspective, I can speak for the Black perspective, or I can even speak for the perspective of another Latin artist who's gone through a different journey than mine. So it's not a monolith. And I think it's that awareness that makes me, to answer your question, makes me confident about anti-racism at this organization, because we're constantly reflecting, we're constantly reaching out and looking for those perspectives in everything we do. So that's sort of the core leadership piece. Now remind me, because it was a 3-part question, so I'll answer.
Sure was. Gosh. Okay. How do you embody anti-racist practices as an individual and as an institution, and how are you demonstrating that to the theater community?
Okay. So as an individual, I think it feels backwards to start there, but I'll start there. I've been very actively involved with the Professional Association of Canadian Theatres. I've been the chair of the diversity and cultural diversity committees at different times. Interestingly enough, like literally less than 2 months ago, we actually brought forward a proposal to sort of dissolve the diversity committee, and it's something that we're looking at sundowning over the next year. But it comes from a place of, with the work that we've been doing with the board and with the association, is that diversity is not a separate thing that happens, that it needs to be embedded into everything the association does. So if it's labor relations, diversity needs to be a part of it. If it is advocacy, equity needs to be a part of it. So that's one of the ways in which I've sort of made sure that my practice remains current. I try to bring that into the hall in creation. Personally, I'm a big believer in more voices helps because it gives us more perspectives. The sort of the traditional hierarchy of one person at the top and everybody's ideas flowing out that way, it's never worked for me. I come from a street performance background many years ago. That's not how it works. But I can tell you that as an organization, I keep coming back to this idea of reflection and action. I mean, right, I was listening again to the interview that CBC did with Ibram Kendi, and the thing that always hits me is this idea of like anti-racism is about promoting anti-racist ideas and performing anti-racist actions. And I know where I sit on that spectrum. I'm a big believer in the action part. And I think this organization reflects, so there's the thought and the ideas, but there's also action. So we've been thinking, I'm going to give you 2 examples, right? Like one of the reasons why our audiences are quite heterogeneous is because we work within the school system. So when people talk about how homogeneous audiences are, that's not the case here at MTYP. But we are aware of the fact that that is by virtue of working with children, with students, with young people in schools. So the thing that makes me lose sleep at night sometimes is, what would happen in a world where we couldn't do that anymore? If MTYP did not have access to audiences through the school system, would we be struggling with those same questions about audiences? I wish I could sit here and tell you right now I have the answer. I haven't cracked it yet, but it's something that we're constantly reflecting on. Another piece is we have a program here at MTYP, Native Youth Theatre, which is about arts training, theatre training for Indigenous youth. And we do review that program with our program director and assistant program director every year. But, I've been here 6 years now, and in that time, we were really coming to a place right before the pandemic where we said, I think it's time to expand that reflection to the community. We need to have some community consultation, and we were working towards that. It's currently on hold, right? But it is something we're committed to doing because our conversations, while there's, again, a plurality of voices in the room, they're not as full as if we actually go to the community and say, what do you think of this program? What do you think it serves? Is it serving your needs? So I think as an organization, those are the things that we're trying to do. In terms of how we're demonstrating it to the theater community, I hope this doesn't sound like a cop-out, but I don't know if that's a question for me to answer. I think that's a question that the community would have to answer, that the artists that we work with, like how they feel about MTYP, especially BIPOC artists whose work has been featured here at MTYP. How do you feel about this organization? Do you feel like you're well represented? Do you feel like your voices are heard? And I hope that as we continue these conversations, we're going to hear that yes, yes, we feel seen, yes, we feel heard, yes, we feel that this is a place where we can create, and this is what we'd like to do next, because it makes my job a lot easier when we have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. The next question?
I don't know, unless you've got any other thoughts. Anything?
No, I think that's a great point, is you can do all you can kind of as an organization and have an impact in mind, or an impact that you hope will happen, but yeah, you can't really speak for the community or the people if that impact that you wanted to happen really happens. There's always a disconnect with that. So that's true.
Yeah.
You gotta ask the actors sometimes.
And directors and designers. We'll talk about that, I'm sure. I think there's a question about that later on.
Sure there is. Well, my next question was, what concrete vision do you have for your theater that includes the minds and bodies of BIPOC folks, both on stage and off, and not just for culturally specific work?
Yeah. So story time. The Prismatic Festival happens in Halifax, and it's a multicultural arts festival. And I remember a few years ago, it really caught my eye. They were having a panel discussion, and the title of the discussion was something like, why is theater for young audiences leading the way in terms of representing diversity? And I thought, as a theater for young audiences practitioner, I should go and take part in that. In all honesty, I don't know that anything was cracked in that conversation, but I found it really, really interesting, because the thing that kept getting missed was that, for me, and this is my perspective, is that the reason why it's happening is because we are led by our audiences. We define ourselves, say we're theater for young audiences, and because those audiences have different needs, different areas of inquiry, different things that they want and that they are, that in a way our sector has responded to that right away, and that's why, like some of these conversations go back decades, right? In terms of a vision, because of that, I think that it is incredibly important for MTYP to play a key role in advancing this work. We are often the first contact that people have with theater, and if from first contact people don't see themselves reflected, they go, well, why is this for me? This is not my life. This is not who I am. So that vision, right, is what drives us forward. I will say, I want to circle back to this idea around casting that we were talking about earlier, and it's, look, the conversation on color-rich casting is like 30, 40 years old. Like, it's so overdue. And I can't take, not that I'm taking credit, I can't even say, since I've been here, this has been a practice at MTYP. This has been at this organization from inception, seeing different people on stage, that all kinds of different people and all kinds of different experiences on stage. That has happened. If anything, in the last 5 years, because as we grow and as we learn, there's been that shift of, we're not just talking about actors, we are talking about directors, we're talking about playwrights, we're talking about designers, because it's not just about the output experience by the audience, but like how it's created from the beginning, from the idea, where those stories come from. And I think that's the part that I find incredibly exciting, because every time we open a door and every time we go, we can work this way or we can work that way, something happens and we discover there's something else we didn't know. That's the hope. For me, that this organization really becomes home to artists of all walks of life who are creating work for young audiences that reflects that experience, and that we've created an environment in which people feel comfortable and safe and engaged in creating that work here. You knew I was coming to an end, right? Like I saw it flicker in your eyes, like, that sounds like the end of a sentence.
Yeah.
And there we are.
There we go, that's it. Yeah, no, and then I had a question for you, but now I don't remember.
Oh no, sorry.
Because you added the comment.
Oh,
but that's
no.
okay. No, I
Let's search for it, please, because I love the question.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's a question you can answer, but it's a question that I guess I think about, which is, if you come to a show at MTYP, the audience can be very diverse, because you have students, you have people from all walks of life. When do you lose that diversity? Like, at what level of theater, at what stage? I'm very curious about. Is it like high schools, or is it like, when does it happen?
Okay, I'll speak from my personal experience, but also with some of the conversations that I've had on some of these working groups that I've been in. For me, the drop-off happens in post-secondary education. There's a natural drop-off in performing for young audiences between elementary and high school. The high school schedule is completely different, so like our attendance numbers, for high school work are going to be lower than elementary school work. So in overall numbers, there's going to be a decrease there, but in terms of the makeup, it's still there. The other thing that happens in high school is that a lot of people become more interested in creating work, not experiencing work. So as before coming to MTYP, when I was working at Carousel Players in Ontario, we had a 3-year program with Brock University where we went and we devised work with high school students. And I can tell you, in those groups, you saw it. It was still there, right? Based on those conversations, the drop-off tends to be as we're going to post-secondary training. And there's a number of reasons, not all of them are valid. Like people talk about immigrant syndrome and what happens when you're second generation, and are you going to be supported in pursuing a career in the arts? There's the question of, do you see yourself reflected in the work that you see professionally? Do you see yourself reflected in the training institutions? All of those factors are there, right? But I couldn't swear to the fact that that's where it happens, but anecdotally, that's where I've seen it happen.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, I think. And then I think that brings me to a different question for a different conversation that I can approach schools and ask at some point.
And I'm not sort of passing the ball and saying it's post-secondary, because I think we have a role to play in that as professional arts organizations as well, right? If we're not executing that vision we were talking about, then that work is not getting generated, so that work is not getting studied, and that work is not getting practiced. Those voices are not being brought to the students. The students are not interested in pursuing that, right? Or they're interested, but they don't know where to access it. So I'm not suggesting that this is someone else's problem. I think this is something we need to work on as well. But yeah, that's where I see it.
Interesting, yeah. It's very interesting to me. Okay. I would reframe this question if
I thought you might.
I would reframe this question, but to be fair, I did write it all in one draft, and it was meant for the community at large, not for you specifically. So the question was, why is your institution hesitant to hire BIPOC artists? I'll go with that one. Now I feel like I'm accusing you of something that I don't actually believe that might be. I don't think that's an issue for MTYP, actually.
But I think the question was driving at the second part, which is like, if there's hesitation, is it because of a perceived lack of training?
Yeah, is it because they're not trained as well, they don't have the formal training, or they don't have enough experience, that sort of thing, yes.
Yeah, and I will start here, and I will say, I do think training and mentorship are incredibly important, and it's something that we're doing and that we want to do more of. I'm always a little concerned when we focus solely on training and mentorship, because it implies that, like artists that I work with who are very good at what they do, that they need more help because they're not as good as the other artists. Like there's a lot of BIPOC artists who are doing incredible work who just need the opportunity to make that work. So yes, training and mentorship, but also opportunity and trusting their skill, right? I just don't want to create sort of a binary that says these artists are properly trained,
right.
These artists are not. But in the case of a lot of BIPOC artists who may not have gone through formal training or who may have trained in other ways, there is a need for those things. At MTYP, we have a number of programs. I mean, we have a large school and we've got Native Youth Theatre, but as a school we do offer a lot of classes, and we want to make sure that those training programs are also welcoming to theatre lovers of all walks of life, right? We have a role to play there, but then also we look at our main stage and our tours and our production, and we think, where are the opportunities? So we have our creators unit, which I think you were in for 1 year.
Yes.
And that's just about exposing artists in our community to what the work for young audiences is, and giving them an opportunity to say, hey, is this something that you're interested in making and creating? And I know that it's been part of sort of our process to make sure that there's a range of voices represented in that unit. I think we do a lot of assistant directing opportunities for artists as well, especially, say, an artist who's a performer who's thinking of transitioning into directing. How do we create that opportunity? I'm really excited. We've been planning this for a year. We've got a show where, because of the nature of it, we had an amazing mentorship opportunity for a designer. So we have an assistant designer built into that show. And I think it's, when we spoke to the designer, they were so clear on this is important, and we said, yes, we want to do it. So it's looking for those places. I think in general, as artists, training is important, and I think that's why it's important to continue to open up training opportunities, because our practice becomes stagnant if we don't.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you bring up a good point about training and mentorship, and also the opportunities. I think for a lot of us, myself included, I feel like in order to get those opportunities, I need that training and that mentorship. And I feel like I see my peers get those opportunities without that same criteria sometimes. So I think that's where my question was inspired by. I know I've talked to certain people about being like, we have to go to Toronto, we have to go to Vancouver, we have to go to the United States, and we're still not taken as seriously sometimes as our local artists who are, how do I say this, white.
Nice take to the camera. That was good. Well done.
It's bad. Yeah, I think that's where my question came from, and I think you hit it with its opportunities. And we can do all the training in the world, but until we get a show on stage, or we get, in the rehearsal room, what else can we do? And
that's the thing, for instance, as a director, and I know, like, I did a lot of assistant directing, but it's not until the first time that somebody said, here, take this show, that I was able to make all of those amazing, awesome calls that I made, and all of the mistakes that I made, and that you need to do that, and at some point you need to, you need to shift from assisting to actually doing the thing, right? You want to fail big time. On a bigger platform. Well, but it's theater, right? Like failure. I mean, a lot of the time people hear failure and they think box office failure, and it's not. Like I think failure in the rehearsal hall is amazing. It's those moments when you go like, well, that really wasn't what we thought it would be. What is it? Yeah, because it's a discovery moment. You learn something from it. Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, I'm a big fan of failure. Oh, me too. You can quote me on that. I love it as well. Let's see. Was there another part of this question? No, you actually answered that question very succinctly. Okay. I did have one last question. Yeah. I feel like I'm planning some kind of hostile takeover now with this question, but
what amount of individual power are you willing to part with so that institutions can thrive under new leadership models?
So I think there's two parts to that. And one is, again, I'm going to put this on people who've worked with me, but people who've worked with me know that people throw the word collaboration around a lot. I actually do believe in ceding power in the room. I don't know if it's because I'm restless. I never sit behind a table in rehearsal because it immediately creates sort of this, the table's there, but I sit on it for 15 seconds and then I'm out. Because if I'm working with you, I want to be in this relationship, right? And I know that's not what the question's about, but in terms of ceding power, I think in programming, let's start there. I can't do it on my own. That's the truth. I don't believe that if I were to do it on my own and to sort of impose the agenda and say, this is a season, my thoughts on the theme for this season are this, and I'm going to pick shows that fit that theme, that has never worked for me. So I really believe in a conversation and a collaboration, and I've got a great team that carries a huge responsibility in those programming choices. I will say that ultimately the responsibility of programming does sit on me. I know, I think it was a marketing director who said to me years ago, and it stayed with me, the problem with marketing is that when a show does well at the box office, it's because it was a brilliant choice by the artistic director. And when it does poorly, it's because people say it was bad marketing, right? And I never want to live in that world. I want to say, like, if the work does what it was intended, it's because as a team, we take credit for it, we did the right thing. And if it doesn't, then as a group, we go, well, we missed, we failed, let's do better. So I do think that there is that from the programming side. I think the question of the leadership model is a really interesting one, and I can tell you spoilers, and I hope Boomer doesn't write to me in anger after this, but part of the work at the PAC board is in the strategic plan for that organization is we're wanting to research alternate models of leadership, because we're always talking about, is there another model? But it hasn't become concrete. We don't know. We continue to work on this not-for-profit, charitable, two-headed monster model. I happen to like it because I've been lucky to work with really great partners, and the way that it's been set up, it's worked. But I also understand that there's other ways of doing it. So there's some research that's going into that. I think those are important conversations about how an organization is run, who decides what level of consultation is practiced in the organization, what level of consultation is required. But the short answer to your question is lots. I actually think that the more we can be in conversation about these things, and I'm happy to take, if it has to sit on me, the responsibility, I'll take it. But I do think that the conversation and that shift in the power structure of saying, I want to do this, as opposed to, we believe that this is what we need to do. I think that's essential.
Great. I really like that answer.
Okay,
well, that was it for my questions. How do you, Pablo, feel about your leadership here at MTYP? Do you feel positively about kind of the progress you've been making and that sort of thing?
Wow. Tricky question, right? Because yes, I do. Yeah. I like the work and I like the conversations we're having. And I have to say, like, this moment in time that we are, where everything has been sort of enhanced and it's so much more present, it is an exciting time because it just focuses the conversations. I can tell you, last couple of weeks we've had amazing conversations with our board of directors, and the way that people have engaged in the conversation. I get excited by it and I go, yes, more, and so many more things that we don't know that we're going to have to work on. Little sidestep, because of course, and I say this to everybody who will listen, this work will never be done. Because if we believe that we're going to live in a world free of oppression, you're a more optimistic human being than I am. And I think that the work of liberation is ongoing, and that the things that we're trying to fix now, people have been trying to fix for decades, for centuries, and that there's new things that we're not even aware of yet, right? So this work is going to continue, so we might as well approach it with passion, with desire. But so the answer is yes, I'm feeling good. I am also keenly aware of the fact that things move at a certain pace, right? And sometimes you go, could we do more? Yes. Do we want to do more? Absolutely yes. Are we able to do more? Not now. And it's that sort of tension between the desire and the ability to implement change that can be difficult in an institution.
Yeah, that completely makes sense. I think, especially these days when everything's just, we have ideas at our fingertips and the internet is there constantly. And I feel in my own work that I want this change to come so rapidly because I can see it and believe in it, but actually implementing it is such a tedious process that will last the rest of my life.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's good to have that, to be passionate about that kind of work and not just see this as like a blip of like, can we not just get over this so we can go back to something, a way of working.
And the other trap, Frances, because this also happens, is when you go, oh, you mean this is not going to be done in my lifetime? So it can wait. It's that you can just push it down the line, and I think some of the frustration that bubbles up is because the conversations have been going on for a long time, so sometimes people feel, when are we going to see change, right?
Yeah.
And the hope is that the change is happening and continues to happen, and that we make it happen, right? But yeah, I just don't want to, I don't want you and I to sit down and have the 10-year reunion conversation and like, remember we talked about this 10 years ago? And then we look back and we go, oh. And
Same
then
question.
nothing happened. Yeah, because nothing's happened. We'd like to be able to look back and say, remember when we had that conversation? What's changed since, right?
Yeah. Well, is there anything else you wanted to touch on in this?
I want to say thank you, and I mean it, Frances, because it does take bravery to ask the questions and to put yourself on the line to saying, here's things that I want to know that I don't agree with. And I know because it's such emotionally charged work that sometimes we can get defensive, and I hope you know that that's just, I hope you're not feeling defensiveness here, but if you do, please tell us, and we will try to adjust. There's constant learning. And I guess the last thing that I would say, Frances, unless you've got something else, is that we just talked about maybe we do this in 10 years' time, but that this is a step. I don't even call it a first step because that implies that we haven't been doing the work. The work is ongoing. This is a step. There is more work that we're going to do, and I'd be happy to sit down and chat with you about where you see that going or not as it happens as well.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Yeah. Thanks, Pablo.
Thanks for hanging out with us for this time.
Thanks, viewers.